Consider this, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bales Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome back to UNO. I'm proud this week to have my guest on. Every week I am, but particularly this week because I have been watching this organization since its inception. I'm talking about the Women's Fund of Greater Omaha, doing some fantastic research, really trying to understand women, the nuts and bolts, so that other people who have control over their lives can understand them and maybe help them help themselves. My guests this week are Ellie Archer. She is the executive director of the, I always want to call it the Omaha Women's Fund. I think people do that, but it is the Women's Fund of Greater Omaha.
Correct.
It's just, talking.
Yeah.
So if I say it wrong, I know you're the Women's Fund of Greater Omaha. And Tracy Zace is, she is a co-chair of the research committee and a board member of the Women's Fund. You've just this month announced the results of your latest in a long list of many projects. And I'm going to let Tracy start. We're talking about one that was a follow-up report.
Exactly.
And follow-up research. And the topic is what women want at work.
Right, Carol.
And they just don't want time to, do their nails, as some bosses might think, or something. They want some pretty serious stuff.
That's right. And I think it helps to think about this research study if we go back and talk a little bit about the one that we just announced the results of last year, What Women Want. It was the first comprehensive, statistically significant study that we did of our constituents. We call them the women of the Greater Omaha area. And we asked them their views about work, about family life, about their communities, and how they view the future. We learned a lot of interesting things. One, which I'm sure you're aware of and most women are aware of, and that they're worried about balancing work and family life. They have multiple responsibilities and it's causing stress for them.
Seems obvious.
It seems obvious.
But this is becoming more statistically and emotionally important as we find out that women are, Dr. Laura on the radio may think they're just working to bring more money on so they can have lots of stuff, but you're finding more that women's income is actually necessary.
That's right. In fact, our first study actually documented that not only did 91% of the women that we talked to say that they feel it is their responsibility to take care of their families, the traditional role that we associate with women. What we found out is that 55% of the women that we talked to are responsible for half or more of their family's income. So while we may think that the women contribute just a discretionary salary to their households, in fact that's not true. For many women working today, working is not a choice for them that they make, it's a necessity for their families.
Now the Women's Fund has been long aware of this. In fact, many of the research that they've done over the years, Ellie, has had to do with women in the workplace, not because that was more important than women in the home, but you knew that all along, in a sense, that this was not just pin money, as my grandmother used to say.
Exactly. Most of the research that we have done, I think, and a lot of it predated me. We're very fortunate at the Women's Fund to have professionals from the community like Tracy in their fields of expertise. We're a small staff, just 1.5 people. So we really rely on...
Doris is only a half person?
A half-time person, that's right.
Oh, an old friend of mine, Doris.
So we really rely on professional expertise in a lot of areas. And I defer to Tracy, who has been involved in the research for a long time. But I think that most of it has focused on economic issues and work issues, census data as it applies to women, that sort of thing.
We'll talk about some of the census data because we're getting some, to pick apart the latest census figures.
That's
but when I read the results of your latest, What Women Want at Work, it didn't surprise me, and maybe it doesn't surprise anyone, but how vastly important, the most important thing is to women. And that is?
Health insurance. Health insurance. Well, I guess the extent to which, or the intensity of importance was a little surprising to me.
That's what I mean. We kind of figure health insurance for let's say if you're fortunate enough to have 2 working parents, and many of these are single mothers that are, I mean, without it,
That's right.
there is no health insurance.
That's right.
But that they think, well, the male insurance, will cover, and then if you have a second insurance policy, that's fine. That can cover the differences sometimes, but that again is gravy.
Well, or it even explains situations that I bet we're all familiar with, where you have a married couple and the woman may be going back to work and trading her salary for daycare, but the health insurance is really why she's doing it, because her husband can't provide it. I don't want to get bogged down in methodology, but there's an aspect of it that I think is important. Instead of just throwing it open to everybody and saying, well, what's important to you at work in terms of workplace benefits? And by the way, when we presented the results from our first survey, one of the things women said was, I'm concerned about having access to benefits. And there were employers in Omaha who asked us, well, what do they mean by that? What benefits are important to them? So that was really the impetus for going back into the field. And instead of just saying, well, what benefits would you like? We did a methodology. We used a methodology that I think parallels the real world situation a little bit more. We took the 6 most popular workplace benefits on the basis of a lot of other research that we had seen. And we presented them to the respondents in pairs. And ask them to pick one or the other. And in effect, we forced a choice. So, for example, we would say, which of these is more important to you? Health insurance or tuition reimbursement? And then we said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much more important is that to you? So, we didn't allow people to just take everything because we didn't feel that mirrored the real world. Seldom does anyone have an ability to just have every benefit that they would like to have. And we were able that way to also measure the intensity of the importance of the benefit that they chose. So, again, health insurance was preferred by the vast majority of women much more intensely. And it didn't make any difference whether they worked full or part-time, their race, their age, their income, their education. There were no demographic differences to that being the most preferred benefit.
Let's just take that one finding right now. What you have on paper and the graphs and the charts, and you say, and basically, nearly 9 out of 10 women surveyed said healthcare was numero uno in the benefit situation. What happens to this now? Does it help employees in getting jobs that have the benefits? Because the women already knew that.
Yeah.
I mean, they knew it in their hearts.
Right.
And in their pocketbooks. Right. And the employers must have some sense that that's important. And we're losing health insurance or shrinking health insurance in many of our workplaces because of the cost of health insurance. Right. So what does this mean? What do we do with these numbers, and how is this going to maybe get more women and families and even maybe husbands? I mean, they're okay too. Bet more health insurance. Put more focus on
that's an interesting question. Obviously, our results were very important to the corporate community because when we introduced the results last week, there were almost 800 people in the audience, and it was primarily made up of business people. So that says to me that we have struck a chord and that the employers are interested in what women want at work. What we do with that from here is part of our challenge, I guess, that we have to go back to the drawing boards. I think Tracy would agree, because as an organization, we are making a more concerted effort all the time to apply the results of our research to our work plan and to our granting mechanism. And so that's work that we have to do, is to figure out how best we can use this information.
Are you hoping that when you come up with the research and you have a figure like that, and we'll talk more about the specific research, that then employers, and I'm not saying they're not good-hearted people, but they have constraints on them, that they can tell their bosses, and then those bosses can tell their bosses that you can't be in denial over this anymore.
Right. I think as an employer myself, what this says to me is that health insurance is the minimum that needs to be provided.
This is not
an
extra.
And retain, right. We want to attract and retain good workers. I take it as a sign that we have well-meaning, good-hearted employers in Omaha that they would ask us to return to the field and find out what women want.
Right.
That was a real positive in my view.
One of the other things you found out, about half the women considered flexible work schedule. And you know, we don't know any individual woman what that term means,
No.
because it can mean different things to different women in different occupations. But were you surprised at that? That came on the strong list?
In other work that I've done, I've seen that flexibility is important. Now, that's where you start seeing demographic differences. Not surprisingly, for women who are 25 to 34 years old, childcare and flexible work schedules are important. Why? Because these are the women that I think, as much as anyone, are struggling with how do you balance those challenges at home with work responsibilities. So for them, that was most important. The older a woman is, the more important things like retirement plans and disability income insurance are. Why? Because that's where she is in life. Those benefits are more important to her in her life.
And again, the education benefits were much preferred by the younger women.
That's right.
Who can see that they're at a point in their life where they may have the time and to up and are looking to the future, not in terms of I'm going to retire, but in terms of how can I better my working situation,
Exactly.
increase my income, and then they'll start worrying more about the retirement.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
You know, for years, it's many companies, although there have been mandatory things that they offer. In other words, we have health insurance and everybody gets that. The cafeteria kind of thing. Or when you're negotiating, and someone says, well, what about the flexible scheduling? I mean, how do you accommodate, what's your definition in your company of flexible scheduling? Obviously, you didn't go into in your research, but do you think this may make companies look a little more at, let's say, flexible scheduling? You know, what can we really accommodate, keep the person productive, and keep good, hardworking employees that we've trained or we've seen through that learning curve situation and want to keep? I mean, do you think that this at least makes them think that we need to look at this?
I think it clearly gives them a priority of importance of benefits to start with, or the cafeteria plan, or the new medical savings account, which is a new government program that provides some form of health insurance. And before I forget, since we are talking about health insurance, I think it would be important to say that
Blue Cross
and
Blue Shield of Nebraska
sponsors the research, and just as they sponsored our first study, they've been generous supporters of the Women's Fund and our research. So
Very definitely.
thanks for letting me get that in.
Oh, no, I have it right here and was not going to forget it, because it does, research does cost money.
Absolutely.
And
Lots
good
of
research costs money.
Yes.
But we, a lot of the big employers, I won't say all at once, but let's say take Blue Cross Blue Shield, let's take Mutual of Omaha, some of the bigger companies that, you know, the more employees you have, the more it's, I think, in your interest, or you don't have extra money, but you have a little bigger pool of resources to pay attention, do a little research, or at least have your personnel take the time and the energy and the money to go look at what women want. Do the smaller companies who have less flexibility in a sense, and your company isn't small, but it's
small.
It's small.
Definitely a small company.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, who don't have a lot of fudge room here and there, whether it's money, time, resources, when we can have our building open, you know, some of these things. You know, can they get any benefit out of these kinds of projects?
Well, I would hope so. Again, Tracy is a small business owner. She can speak
But you know
to
what I
the
mean?
point.
There's just...
I think so, Carol. From this standpoint, I think small businesses, and this is, I've seen this in national research, small businesses are the ones that are struggling with the decision about whether they're going to be able to continue to provide health insurance to their employees.
Absolutely.
Because 50% premium rate increases are not uncommon. I think the average from 2001 to 2002 was like 27%, as I recall. That's a big increase. And so they're struggling with, do they just absorb that increase, or are they able to pass some along to their employees? And what it tells me as a small business person is this is one area where we probably can't scrimp. There may be other work areas or benefit areas. So from that standpoint, I think it's been helpful, and I hope it is a guide for other business owners, large or small.
One of the things that I think people forget, and we touched on it because women are, their income is becoming more crucial to the family, is that when the Women's Fund tries to do these projects and look at what women, the situation of the status of women. You've done some research to basically where the glass ceiling kind of research that you've done years ago. That when you find a way or some data that can help better a woman's situation in the world, that really what you are reaching is families.
That's right.
Yes.
In some way or another. Even if at my age, I know women that are working and have gone back to work to help sons and daughters now that are married and have kids, and one of them got laid off.
That's right.
So we're not talking just let's just do this for women, as if that isn't a good enough reason. But I mean,
it's much broader than that, and in fact, one thing that the research pointed out was that women, at least the initial research, was that women really frame their idea of success in terms of their families. It's very much a universal view in that sense, and when they talk about social issues, they frame them in the context of their own family and family concerns. So I think, yes, that's very accurate, that we're the Women's Fund, but we're much broader. You know, women's issues impact their husbands, their families.
I mean, because we used to hear the thing years ago, and I don't think we hear it nearly as much, as that, you know, if you had to make a choice between giving a job to a woman and a man, the man has to support the family. Now that's pretty much outmoded, at least in our overt action and our overt words. But we haven't, I don't know if people have really made that connection, that really when you hire the best person or the worst person or whoever you hire, that you're affecting a family generally.
Yes.
That's right. You know, we had an interesting speaker last year for the Women's Fund, Joan Peters, who's written many books about women's roles, and she made a comment which made me think a lot about our women in leadership positions research, which you talked about a little bit. She said, really, when we look at women in the workplace, it isn't so much women versus men anymore, it's mothers versus others. And what that means, and that would explain why in many cases on an entry level, women have achieved some amount of parity with men at work. But women still have to make a decision whether they want to move on a management track or a mother track. Women have not been relieved of their full responsibility with children.
And many
Not
of
that
them
they
wouldn't
want
want to be. In fact, your
Most
research
of them don't want to be.
Showed that they
Most of them
don't
want to be.
That they don't want to be.
I think they wouldn't mind sharing those responsibilities a little more fully, so that they have an opportunity at work.
In and of itself. But I think that the important thing is there's been a lot of criticism of women in some quarters about women wanting it all. Sometimes women want to be good mothers and they want to have a career, but sometimes the needs supersede the wants. In other words, I need health insurance.
Right.
I still need to get the kid to soccer too, or somebody does in that family. So I mean, it's not just what I think maybe when I was starting out in the working world, when they really became aware women could do this, and we were getting different jobs and new opportunities, and so maybe we were a little, you know, the sort of the excitement of it all, opening new doors. Not that there are still some to be opened, but and more of them open. But I think now it's and many of us pushed families aside or waited, didn't push them aside, but waited. But now it's not making a choice sometimes.
That's right.
You know, you may have had the family gone along the, I wouldn't say the traditional mommy track, but you know, a little bit of career and a family. And then all of a sudden you find out that the career has to be enhanced. It's not just, I'm a career woman. And so this is probably important, or probably showed up in some, depending on the types of women. You interviewed all kinds of women in all kinds of jobs. Over 600 in Douglas and Sarpy County.
That's right. Totally. Yeah, and I think another question in the survey was, what can your employer do to help you feel more productive at work? And quite a few women, and as I recall, it was most popular response among older women is provide training and learning opportunities, which may reinforce what you just said. After you've come back to the workplace and your children are grown and a little more self-sufficient, then I think it's true for a lot of people that they're looking for new opportunities and they look for training and resources to help get them there.
We shouldn't forget money.
No.
We shouldn't forget compensation,
Right.
and increased compensation. We're still human, and we feel that getting raises or getting paid what we're worth, whether it's compared to men or just in the marketplace, is a sign that we're appreciated.
Right.
Again, no surprise, but what does the specific finding mean?
Well, I think it means two things. Number one, what you just said. We asked women, what can your employer do to help you feel more successful at work? Now, in my view, that means, of course, I don't know how they interpreted that, and it's always dangerous to guess how your respondents interpret your questions, but we tested. I think it means, rather than productive at work, I think it means what makes you feel appreciated. And the most popular response had to deal with compensation, as you already said. Secondly, let's go back to the finding that we had that very many women have big responsibilities for supporting their families. Compensation is why they're working.
Right.
So for many of us, the question about do I work or do I stay home is just not a question that's feasible.
In years past, you've looked at issues like daycare, and you've looked at, again, the glass ceiling and how women were moving up in the workforce. Now you're working on pulling apart some of the census data. How important do you think that the research that the Women's Fund does is in opening eyes, both of women and of the people who affect women's lives? And they could be other women, they could be men.
Well, we hope, very much so. We are really a three-pronged organization, Carol. Research is one piece of it. Then we try to take the results of our research and educate the community about the issues. We do that in several ways. We publish a magazine called Today's Omaha Woman. We are fortunate occasionally to have appearances like this where we can spread the word. And then finally, we do make grants, and more all the time, as I mentioned earlier. We're trying to do our grant making in concert with the research that we're conducting. So we're really a three-pronged attack there. And of course, primarily what we are is a steward of a fund that brings resources to the community that allows us to do these kinds of things. And we struggle with the same issues that all nonprofit organizations do. We have to raise money to, pay the rent and the salaries and all of that, and
which, by the way, you're
grants.
Embarking on another little, fundraising effort,
right.
which I think everybody is at the same time. So that makes it more interesting. Mm-hmm. But okay, so we sit here, and I might mention that you can find this research, at least and I would say the broad strokes, and we're not talking 1 or 2 pages, we're talking about 20 pages on the latest research with charts and stuff. It's OmahaWomen'sFund.org.
Yes.
No apostrophe, of course.
Correct.
And an email address. And you can find some of the other research. But so this is out there now. It's sitting out there, and it says nearly 9 out of 10 think health insurance is the most important benefit. 50% want increased compensation. It sits out there. What are some of the things you can do with this? And then we'll talk about the census data.
Okay.
No, you got it here now.
Well, this, like a lot of our other research, this doesn't seem to me to have as direct implications about grant making that we can do. We thought it was important because our employers asked us to do it, and so that's why we did it.
And they wanted to know. They want a little more quantitative
That's right.
stuff rather than just, well, I think this is what they want.
And we're making that available to them. It might be worthwhile investigating means of wider access or affordability for healthcare and health insurance. But I'm also well aware that that's a huge issue that many people are looking at right now.
There
for
are
years
no
have been trying to find solutions.
Right.
So what about the census data that you're starting to, got a few minutes here.
Okay, well in 1990 we published a study called How Women in Omaha Are Doing, or How Women Are Doing in Omaha, which essentially extrapolated census data from the 1990 census and gave us just a report card, if you will, about how women were doing economically, occupationally, and just in terms of raw numbers in the population. We're updating that with the 2000 census as a benchmark. So that should be ready probably early next year.
And so those will be tools, I think, to at least to find out how far they've come.
Yes.
Since you have baseline figures that you were, and I would hope it would show that women are doing better. But with the economy changing, and you mentioning that more of our women have to work. They have to go back. There's there's a lot of single mothers out there. That maybe these figures will skew a bit, but we really don't know how. Any national figures to give us a hint?
Haven't seen them yet.
What about some of the figures, the health insurance and the things you did on this, what women want at work? How does this compare nationally?
One comparison that I think is really striking, which is interesting to know, that in Omaha about 79% of the women work outside the home compared to 69% nationally.
We have
Omaha
a much higher
has
percentage.
a much higher percentage of women working outside the home than is true nationally.
That really blows me away.
That statistic surprises a lot of people.
Because a 10% jump over a national norm is a ton.
Statistically
Yes.
significant. It's really much. That's why I think the Women's Fund got involved in such initiatives as childcare, how women are doing at work, women in leadership roles at work, and other areas, because we recognize that a huge portion of our female population is trying to balance work and family life.
And you're talking about Metro Omaha in your research, but I think statewide we're reading more and more that women are having, especially even in our farming communities.
Oh, yes.
To get a job for the health insurance.
That's right.
And fewer companies are offering it that are struggling. So, well, people should go to the website. I'll mention it again because it is a good website and it's worth checking out. This research is very excellent. You can copy it and give it to your boss.
Absolutely.
Or boss's
That's
boss.
right.
We encourage that.
It's OmahaWomen'sFund.org. We will also encourage you to go to our website at untv.unomaha.edu. You can catch the show in streaming mode after we get it all taken care of. I want to thank you for joining us today. Just the tip of the iceberg, but let people know you're there and what you're doing, and maybe some employers will get some ideas.
We hope so.
Thanks so
for
much.
the opportunity.
Ellie Archer, Tracy Zace.
Thank you,
Thanks for joining
Carol.
us on Consider This. And thank you. See you next week.